All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Justice and Pieces guest speaker series. And today's guest is Mayor Cheryl Fort. Cheryl was elected as mayor of Hornpain. She is the first female and first Indigenous mayor for the community. She's also the second Indigenous mayor to be elected anywhere in Ontario. She has an extraordinary appetite for community building and is always hunting down new information and best practices in this regard. So thank you, Mayor Fort, for taking the time and joining us here today.
Well, thank you for having me. It's my pleasure to be here.
All right, so first of all, for my Toronto-centric students who may not know of the Tournament of Hornpain, could maybe give us a big background? I know I saw that you have a really nice bridge. I see a lot of people taking the pictures of there and the very beautiful scenes there. Probably in the summer, it's nice waters and nature. But perhaps you can expand a bit on Hornpain. Where exactly is it, and what is it all about, the town of Hornpain?
Yeah, definitely. I'd love to do that. So Hornpain is actually the geographical center of Ontario. So yeah, 12 hours to the south and then another 12 hours to the Manitoba border. We are located between the two Trans-Canada highways, Highway 11 and Highway 17. And we are on the main transport of rail. So that CN, Canadian National, runs through Hornpain as well. And most of the people here are forestry workers or railroaders, but we do have a hospital, 3 elementary schools, and a high school. And yeah, we do have really beautiful summers and gorgeous winters. Our winters, we get usually a lot of snow and then it gets quite cold. So we have this beautiful white, cold, dry winter, and we don't get much humidity in the winter. This winter is a little unusual. We do have a bit more humidity, but usually by this time it's cold right down by about -15, -20 at night. But we're still at -1 right now.
Perfect. So perhaps maybe you could tell us a bit about yourself and how you got to be the mayor of Hornpain. And again, it's pretty a big deal there. The first Indigenous and first female mayor, and the second Indigenous overall anywhere in Ontario.
Yeah, it was basically, let's start back when I was in my early 20s. I became a trustee for a school board. From there, I always volunteered. I did different things within my community here in Hornpain. I was a chairperson on the library board, and then I just all different sorts of volunteer activities. And then there became a vacancy on council. I had never thought of running for council, but this vacancy came up at an opportune time, and I had been attending meetings because some of the decisions that were coming to council were concerning to me. And so I had been attending, then this vacancy came up and I filled the vacancy. 4 of us went for that vacancy and I was chosen. So I came on halfway through a term and became a councillor. When I was during that half a term of council, I confronted a lot of issues concerning different laws that had been made way in the past that didn't work today for people. They weren't inclusive. There was a lot of barriers for people to succeed, and I saw this and I confronted it on council. I was on council, and then to become mayor, what it came down to was I had to make a decision. I had to decide because I had only had 2 years on council, and I had to make a decision whether I thought I could do another full term, which would have been, in my mind, for me personally, I thought, oh, it'd be more beneficial to have more experience on council as a councillor. But the people that were going to run, who I sat with on council, was the mayor and the deputy mayor, which we had all sorts of different conflicts and headbutting, and it was we didn't see eye to eye, and they in moving forward and moving different new laws forward, I saw this as a hindrance. So I was like, do I want to be on council for another 4 years and have to deal with this? Or do I think that I have the strength and the courage to run for mayor and let's lead a council and make some change for our community? And I did, in the end, chose that decision. Obviously, I'm mayor now. And I do believe that for that time, I'm the right person for this time in Northern Ontario, for this time in Hornpain, because we didn't have a female mayor before. This was a huge change in itself, but also that I'm the first Indigenous mayor. So it's opened a lot of doors and opportunity for Hornpain because I have a lot of connections, but at the same time, it creates a lot of change within our community because people have to view their community different through a different lens, and we have to see that there's more players in a community than in the majority. In the past, it has always been male leadership. So it's a good change, and my community's embracing it well. I'm proud to be the mayor of Hornpain, and this first half term of council that I've been leading, we've done significant changes so far. So does that answer your question fully?
Yes, so let's talk about some
Okay.
of those changes since you've become a mayor. What's been the biggest issues in the town of Hornpain? And certainly we'll talk about COVID-19 in a bit as well. But what does your community need? What has your community accomplished in your time? And what do you see in the future there for the town of Hornpain?
Yeah, so we had to focus and get back to basics in Hornpain. We had several years where fundamental documents weren't being looked at, and we fall underneath the Municipal Act, which governs municipalities. And there's a plan that's called an official plan in there, some zoning bylaws, different laws that you're allowed to put in place. And we hadn't updated our official plan since basically its inception. It had one update in the 80s, which it should be updated and looked at every 5 years. So this was the first undertaking, is that we're doing that right now. We're actually creating a whole new official plan for the municipality, and the consultation process is open right now for that. And then this will allow us to go now 10 years without having to update it, and then it'll fall into the regular process of updating it. And why is that so important? It's because it's the foundation of what your municipality is going to look like, how it's going to behave, and how it's going to grow, and where industry, commercial, and residential properties will be in the municipality. So it's a very important document, and we're just in the process of doing that. So that's a huge change. One of the other changes that we've done at the municipality is we have changed the organizational structure. It was before very it was a slow process because everything had to go through the CAO. It bottlenecked there. So we did a service delivery review of our entire municipality. So we did that in the first 6 months that I became mayor. And we had an outside organization come in and do this for us. And what we found was we had to change this organizational structure. And it has been, the rewards of changing it have been so good. The CAO now has 4 department heads under her. We have a female CAO, and she is so now she has the support of the 4 department heads, and we have the fire chief, client service manager, with the public works manager and the economic development officer. All they run their departments, and now they have this senior management team, which is brand new for Hornpain. And also that in this first 2 years, we've created the economic development arm and hired an economic development officer. That was actually the first thing when I came onto council. That was the first thing I went after, was the funding to hire and secure funding so that we could have an economic development officer. So this is all happened in the last 24 months, and we're moving quite quickly because we have some catching up to do, because all of these documents and everything need to be in place so that we can go after funding. We do have much infrastructure that needs upgrading. All of our water underneath our roadways definitely need upgrading. So there's lots of work ahead to do, but these fundamental and foundational documents give you the leverage when you're applying for funding, when you're going after funding. You need them to be updated, and we're getting there one step at a time.
Now, certainly right now, all over the world, we're hit with this pandemic, COVID-19, and I would imagine with such beautiful summers there, that the impact it may have had on some tourism, and on both ends too, right? Because I think with a small township, that there'd be a little bit more fear of people coming up from Toronto or anywhere in Ontario or around Canada to visit. And what could happen in terms of the impact there in the township. So could you share perhaps now what impact has COVID-19 had on your township, and what is the plan there to prevent, because I think, in a small township of around 1,000 people, I believe that if a few people get it, it could spread very quickly because everyone goes to the same stores, everyone, there's the three schools, right? So it's a lot more dangerous in that sense to grow rapidly. So perhaps maybe you can share a bit of insight about how that's been in your township.
Yes, definitely. COVID has given us many challenges. So back in the beginning in March, even before the province put the province into emergency, we had our first emergency meeting on March the 13th. And I actually closed all our facilities that Friday. We closed our arena, we closed our library, we closed our township offices. We didn't put our town into a state of emergency until about 3 weeks after that, but we had already convened our emergency response and we're meeting regularly. And we've been meeting regularly weekly, actually, with the Porcupine Health Unit, which is our health unit that governs us from Hornpain into Timmins. And why this was so important for Hornpain is like I had mentioned, we are a change off point for the Canadian National Railway. So we have several workers every day that go to the east of us into the Cape Rail Sudbury area, and they stay there, rest, and then they come back home on a train back. And then the same thing happens to the west of us. We have people that are regularly going into Armstrong, that's just north of Thunder Bay, and they rest there and then come home. And we also have several transient workers that come in that also live in the town of Hearst, Long Lac, and White River, that come in and work in our community. So right off the bat, we knew, and if you can remember back in those early months in March and April, we didn't know the extent of spread of COVID. All we knew was that there was a virus out there, that it was very deadly, and that it could spread easily. And we weren't even sure of the spread, like how it was being spread. And I had actually just come back from a conference. I was very concerned. We had people out of the community traveling abroad, and everyone had to return home, and there was quite a few people and families that had to self-isolate for those first 14 days. So just to put it into perspective of what we're dealing with in Northern Ontario, is not only will a few cases paralyze our community, it will also overwhelm our healthcare system. So our little hospital in town, we do have a hospital, we do have a doctor and a great staff there, but it also houses our long-term care facility. So we have 12 long-term care beds in that facility as well. So that's a huge concern. These are our loved ones. And that's the other thing with a small community, is I might not know every person in my community, but I definitely know someone close enough to everyone in my community. So this virus could have devastating effects, not only with illness, but also in the unfortunate case that people would pass away from the illness. We would be hit hard emotionally, financially, and the overwhelming emotional response to it would be hard to take. And we're seeing that even now, just with mental health, and that we've been encouraging all of our community, all the surrounding communities, to reach out for mental health supports. Don't be lonely, that sort of thing, and really watch your mental health and connect socially. I am so glad that we have the internet and social media and different avenues to connect. We do have pretty good internet in Hornpain. We are fortunate. A lot of communities in Northern Ontario struggle with their broadband, so we are fortunate that we do have that access. So there are quite a few different number of concerns. And like I said, we've been meeting regularly with our Porcupine Health Unit, and I do Facebook Live Q&As for my community. I do them usually about once a month. Sometimes when the spikes are coming up, I'll do them more. At this time right now, I haven't been doing that many. We are going to start again doing updates, just because we were giving people a rest and we didn't want them to worry coming into the winter. But now we have a case that's in Marathon. We've just found that out yesterday. And although this may seem unusual for people in the South, that I am concerned about a place that's 2 hours away from me, but we're so connected, we're so close that our communities all interact. And one final topic that I want to touch on, and I do this very delicately so people can understand the magnitude of where we're at in Hornpain. We don't have a funeral home. We don't have cremation services here. Our services come from Greenstone, Geraldton, actually. So that's 2.5 hours away. And when this pandemic first hit, we had to actually look at, if we were to see several people pass away from this virus, what could we do respectfully with remains? How are we going to deal with this? Because I don't want to be making those decisions at the last minute. And we found out by reaching out to our funeral director in our area that probably between 10 to 12 deaths would overwhelm our system. And that's unsettling. So we've been working hard with our surrounding areas and all of the communities so that no one has to be put in a place where if these unfortunate things do happen, that we still can deal with people's sorrow and give sympathy and empathy, and also deal with remains respectfully. So it is a devastating and difficult disease, and it's not something I take lightly. And I share that with you sensitively because I want people to understand the magnitude and the depth of what we deal with when we live in an isolated part of the province.
Thank you for sharing that, and certainly it's something, whether you have a township of under 1,000, or you have cities in Toronto where you have millions of people, that it can spread in every different way and within communities. And what has that done in terms of, now you had certainly some time as mayor before that, in terms of changing how you do things? And you did point out, and I think it's really important, again, another thing for those maybe very Toronto-centric here, is that we don't realize, we take for granted things like the broadband internet connection, to have, to go onto Zoom and reach out to your constituents. At least you're fortunate enough to do that. But other areas in Northern Ontario, that on top of being isolated, you're also isolated online as well. So it makes it even more challenging that people don't necessarily know what's going on and can't connect to loved ones because the connection is not stable.
Yeah, that is very true. There's many communities in our area, and not even just in Northern Ontario, because I am a director for the Ontario Good Roads Association, and I have colleagues that live in rural Ontario in the south, but in the rural part, and they have broadband issues there as well. So through COVID, what we've found is that internet is an essential service now. It's like when the phones first came on and changed the way we lived and interacted with each other. That is what internet has done. And if communities don't have access, it really hinders their ability to participate, not like, especially in this measure with COVID and the being prepared and being connected with the right people to help you prepare your community and to connect all your organizations. We did have, I was fortunate enough when I first got on council, I was the councillor that worked with our emergency management plan. So coming in as mayor, I was very familiar with the plan, but we had no setup to deal with a pandemic. It happened very quickly. We ended up going online. I actually reached out to Ontario Good Roads, and they helped us get online with GoToMeetings, and we were able to separate our council and separate our staff very quickly, because my concern was that those first few weeks was, what if one of our people are infected and we're all infected, we don't know it, and then we can't give care, we can't be there to provide for people. So we were really proactive in spreading ourselves out, getting some isolation between ourselves right off the hop, because it was so important that we would need some people that could continue leading if the virus had already been in our community. just like you had said earlier, that yeah, it would spread quickly if no precautions were in place, and the protocols that are in place now had not been in place in March, and it would have spread quickly through our community. We are well connected, and we love living that way, but we quickly reacted, and we have there was our stores closed down and all of that, what you saw across the province. We implemented everything. And like I had said, we had started implementing 5 days before the province even put us into a state of emergency across the province. So yeah, it's COVID has opened our eyes to some of the weaknesses in our delivery systems as well. And that's a good thing. Like, we need to see where we could maybe have problems with transportation, with food coming into our grocery store. We only have the one grocery store. Another issue too is power failures, and that sort of thing. All of those regular emergencies that we tend to deal with and don't really think about on our regular daily lives outside of COVID have been magnified in COVID as well.
Is there anything from this experience that, and you certainly highlighted that there with the grocery stores and the essential services, that you would going forward now do differently, because something so unprecedented happened that you didn't really get an opportunity to plan for something like this? Nobody expects such a pandemic to hit, and every day there's a new challenge to deal with. So is there anything that, looking, let's say, down the road, now the vaccines are around the corner, it appears, and there's the light at the end of the tunnel, is there anything that you could look from this experience and say, this is part of the new normal here in Hornpain, that we need to be doing things this way because we've seen what could happen if we're not prepared?
Yeah, I really think definitely part of the protocols of washing your hands more regularly and using sanitizer, and just thinking about where you've been and what you're touching and how you're interacting with the environment that you come in contact with every day. But in the long term, yes, I do see that we need to make fundamental changes in the way that our society exists. And the one element that I see for Northern Ontario is we need to have more food within our area. You could call it the 100-kilometer diet or what have you, more farms, more livestock, more items that are grown and stored here and trading amongst our area, just because we are so isolated that I realized very quickly that if the transportation drivers, and there was several cases along the corridor that bring the food to our community, that this could really be a hindrance to our health and our availability of fresh produce and meat to our community. So I would like to see in the future that we start changing that way. And I'm not saying that we can't have those delicacies from down into the southern areas, but we really need to look at how we interact with our food, how we grow our food, where it's coming from. And if countries are locked down, do we have enough to sustain our own people within our country? And we've seen this even with our PPE, our personal protective equipment, that we didn't have enough in Canada to supply our own country, and that Ontario came on board, thankfully, even with the hand sanitizing, that companies came on board and revamped their equipment so that they could provide us these essential needs at this time. So I think in the long term, yeah, this new normal is going to look a little different. I think we need to have some new long-term planning on always, not that we don't want to participate in a global market and a global society, but we also have to always ensure that we're taking care of at home, that we're watching out for our own, and that we can survive on our own. And maybe we can be a provider to the world when there is world crisis.
So you mentioned the grocery store and having one store there. I mean, it poses certain problems about how do you limit the amount of people to come in, and even shortages, right? I mean, I could understand. So even in Toronto, we'd had like the whole toilet paper scandal there of people kind of hoarding toilet paper of all things at the start of the pandemic. But how was that in terms of essential places that you're seeing maybe one or two places within the community that making sure everyone has the same abilities to get access to food and things of that nature without overrunning the town or creating this panic buying that you're seeing in communities across the GTA and other areas in Ontario.
Yeah, we didn't experience the panic buying on the scale that cities did. We are a resilient people already, so we do have pantries and freezers and what have you. We kind of lock down sometimes. That's part of our nature where we live and how we live in Hornpain, and I would say probably across Northern Ontario. But what we did find was that we had to very quickly limit the times and allow times for just our seniors to shop, for just our vulnerable people in our community to shop, because and we only have our grocery stores only open from Tuesday to Saturday as well. So we already knew what it was like to go a few days without a grocery store open. And that wasn't so much the problem. It was that what if the food didn't keep coming? And we could probably, I would say most people in my community probably could go a month or so on their own stocks. But we have those stocks in case of emergency, but I wouldn't want to see it where our transportation, those routes get cut off, and then it could create panic, right? So, yeah, so we experienced it on a different level in Northern Ontario. The part that was really a hindrance to us, that was hard for us to grasp, was we do, for example, a dentist. I travel over 2 hours to the dentist. There's people that travel an hour and a half into the community of Hearst to the dentist. So this was troubling because we had people that are going for regular services, especially when the province started to open back up in June. We had a lot of transient in and out of our community, and we're traveling 150 kilometers. And one of the things as well is that Hornpain is in the middle of the two highways. So we don't have that transient through traffic that Hearst or White River or Wawa would see on a regular basis. So now our residents are going into a community or a small city that has many people that are transient through. So we did our due diligence to prepare the residents of Hornpain to really be on top of wearing their mask and washing their hands, and I would say almost to the line of fear. I didn't want to impose fear on people, but I wanted them to be protective and understand that you can come in contact with the virus at any time. That's the way we've been thinking in Hornpain, is we don't want to spread it. So let's think about, if we had it, what are we going to do? And if we come in contact, what are we going to do? And the community's been very supportive in that and understanding that, and people have been really limiting travel.
I just wanted to switch gears a bit here and certainly celebrate the fact that you're the first female mayor and the first Indigenous mayor in the community, and just the second Indigenous mayor overall in Ontario. And I think it's really troubling that you, I mean, congratulations to you, but really troubling that you're just the second person in all of Ontario uh, of an
Well,
Indigenous background.
I'm the second female in all of Ontario. I'm not sure
Yeah.
if I'm the second Indigenous. I don't
Second,
know if
sorry,
we've
sorry,
only had
second
the
female,
yes, yes,
Indigenous
yes,
mayor. Sorry, yeah.
yes.
But still troubling with those two underrepresented groups in politics. There,
Mm.
that you are the second female Indigenous mayor in all of Ontario. So, what do you think needs to be done to encourage more women and more Indigenous women and maybe even broadly more women of color or people of color to have greater opportunities. We've been talking a lot on my show here with students about systemic racism and what we can do to avoid things like that. But perhaps maybe you can give us a completely different perspective from Northern Ontario and from the Indigenous community that we haven't talked about here.
Yeah, I think first of all, it's having the belief that we need women and Indigenous people and all people to sit on different boards, to make laws, to learn how to participate in those environments. So first off, I would encourage anyone to participate on a board, get involved in, there's library boards, hospital boards, small committees. There's all sorts of ways to participate in school. There's committees. This is going to teach you the fundamentals on how to get progress and move things along, because bureaucracy can be slow, but if you know the way it works, you can move things through and make significant changes. So I think that's the first thing, is believing that it's important. And I truly believe that we need our governments to represent society. They can't be lopsided, and people can't be making rules for situations they don't understand. So, or laws for that matter. So I think that's the initial underlying, is that Canadians need to embrace the belief that we need to change our government, the people that are making those decisions at the top, and make them look like our societies, and it's representative of us. Because that's basically what we're doing, right? We're living together in community. And what do we all want? We want to have happy, fulfilling lives, everyone. And everyone can have those. One person's fulfillment in life doesn't make someone else's life worse. The better people are, the more people can be better. So, and then further that with women, the biggest hindrance that I've seen is as a mayor and being on social media and that sort of thing as a mayor, because I am very proactive that way, is that women are attacked quite a bit. I've said this to people straight out. I will be very blunt in this, is that would you have approached me with that tone or with that attitude if I was a man? And usually that calms things down. Usually that people take a minute to step back and think about what they're saying, think about what they're doing. And that needs to change. I treat people the same, whether I'm on the keyboard or whether I'm in face to face, and I expect the same in return. So that was very difficult. And I didn't see that before I came in. That's something you don't see until you are walking in those shoes, that you are that person. It doesn't happen so much when you're a counselor. I think it can, depending. I know I have talked to some women counselors that have some struggles within their municipalities, and I try to encourage them. And I am involved with women in politics out of Thunder Bay. When I first got on as a counselor, I reached out, and actually the first female Indigenous mayor, Wendy Landry, was my mentor, and Rebecca Johnson, who is a counselor out of the city of Thunder Bay, was a mentor for me. And I appreciated being able to pick up the phone and giving them a call when I was in those tough situations. And the last point I'll close on is when you see women or Indigenous people in positions, encourage them. They need encouragement. I get a lot more negativity than I do encouragement. I spend a lot of time encouraging myself, reading a lot of good material. I read nonstop, and I am constantly reading positive, uplifting, good material. And I would suggest to any young person, or any person for that matter, at whatever age, that Stephen Covey's book, 7 Habits of a Highly Effective Person, is an amazing book. And so I would suggest that, how do you want to get more people, more women on boards in a political era or in a political arena, you want to encourage them. You want to encourage them when they're there. You want to support them, and you want to have their back, because it's a battlefield. It's not. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. The things that people think they have the right to say to me is astonishing.
Thank you for sharing that, and it's really troubling that people are like that, and certainly you got to deal with the negativity and the discouragement, and that's all the more reason that you need sources of encouragement. Now, perhaps looking back on your own journey, uh, did you at ever point, I mean, whenever you made the decision to get into politics and then eventually to run for mayor, did you ever think, well, why haven't we had a female mayor here, and why haven't we had an Indigenous person take this role on, a female Indigenous person take this role on? What did you kind of draw upon before making that decision, saying, "Let's, enough is enough. It's time to get involved and change the conversation"?
Yes. So, like I said in my opening remarks about being in the right time at the right place and time. So my children were already raised. I had the time and the opportunity to run at that time. I felt personally prepared to sacrifice the time, that I knew that it was going to take time. Anything that is going to bring about good change is going to be hard work and take time. So I knew at that place that I was willing and ready to make a change. And I had worked in a male dominated environment for 10 years before I got on council, actually 11 years before I got on council. And there I had encountered many different situations where I had to ask myself, do I want to make the world better for my daughters? Do I want to make the world better for my son and his wife and his family and their future children? And that played a big part in stepping up and being at the forefront. Someone has to be a first. Someone has to do it first. And I encourage all the women in the community. I see lots of different changes of people expressing themselves, opening up, feeling more free to be themselves as well. Is that the thing is we can't hinder people. We want to encourage them to be the best that they can be in whatever passion that they have, and to go after their dreams. So yeah, it's not an easy path to take, but I do think that many more women should take it, and I see it is going to get easier as the time goes on. You have to remember, for myself as an Indigenous woman in Canada, I only got the vote in 1960. So this is a huge change for me to and so that was before I was born, but from 1960 Indigenous women can vote to now in 2020 there's Indigenous women that are mayors. So things are moving, and the change is good. And I think now we're at a tipping point where a lot of our male counterparts are starting to see the dynamic and good changes that have been made over this course of time, that women have had a more active role in decision making and lawmaking.
Perfect. And certainly, your daughters and your son and his family, and all of the people in the schools there in Hornpay could see, well, look, here's an example, and that in turn builds the momentum, right? Because you can see others in that role, and certainly, congratulations to you, and I'm sure you're a great role model for all of those people looking and say, now we have an example, right? And that we can look at why not continuing this, and also the other areas in Northern Ontario that can look at that as an example for there. So congratulations for you and in your success in that role thus far.
Thank you for that. And I just want to add to that too, it doesn't matter what your background is, and where you've come from to participate in politics or get involved in your community.
Now, in terms of the indigenous community, then what sort of the issues are there that maybe you can point to in terms of, I mean, I'm not sure the exact demographics in Horn Pain, but what more can be done on that front with respect to bringing people from the indigenous community to the table and having a more opportunity to speak on various issues, you know, that we've seen all across Canada, to be part of the conversation, whether it's large scale issues or small scale issues in small communities or in large cities all across Canada.
Yeah, this is very close to my heart. So we have passed in Horn-Pain a strategic plan of council, and we just passed that at the beginning of March, the end of February. And what we've committed is that we are going to have an Indigenous Advisory Council for our community. So that's going to come about in this next year in 2021. And what we're looking at is we want some input on how we can embrace the truth and reconciliation calls to action. There's, I believe, 5 that call out municipalities right in the document specifically. I would like to see those addressed for our community, and we have started to do some training at our council and committee levels for Indigenous training. But I think too is that people need to really understand there needs to be in the whole Canadian society a lesson in what the Indian Act is, what it means for Indigenous people, and what it means to have nation to nation agreements. Those are what treaty agreements are. And there's a lot of confusion out there. There's a lot of misinformation and not understanding the rights of Indigenous people. And also that the Canadian government didn't give Indigenous people their rights. Indigenous people are nations on their own right, and they have their own inherent rights. So there's a lot of confusion out there. I think it needs to be discussed. So at our local level, that's what we're looking at doing, is establishing our Indigenous Advisory Council. And I really don't want to push farther from there, because I really want them to guide us on what. Currently in Horn-Pain, we do not do a land acknowledgement yet. I would like to see that. I'd like to see that formed. I'd like to see other ways that we could build bridges and help Indigenous people participate in the municipality, but also how we can be good neighbors across Northern Ontario, because there are many different bands around us in particular. And my home reserve is Ambatung First Nation, which is a fly-in community up north of Nikina. So I do see this as a good start to understanding that we can be in the same place, share the same lands, but be very different people.
Now, one of the things you just mentioned there, and I think it applies across all of the world really, is dealing with negativity. And I think a lot of my students, especially online, that people, maybe it's easier to troll or comment because you can't put a face or a name, even in some cases, to those comments, and uh, they don't necessarily realize the impact of bullying or cyberbullying. Um, they're just trolling or commenting. And so you mentioned that a few questions ago about having to deal with a lot of that negativity. What advice maybe you can share with some of my students who hear all of those messages? I mean, not necessarily in the political avenue, but just generally of how to overcome that adversity and negativity and focus on the encouragement that they're getting, or they may not be getting enough of from other sources.
Yeah, great question. Great question. Thank you for asking me this, because I've given this quite a bit of thought. So I have a few different recommendations and suggestions for people using, first of all, social media. Years ago, when Facebook was first formed, I, of course, got on Facebook, started using it, and realized very quickly that, I didn't feel well after I'd use it. There was this envy and jealousy was coming up in me, and there was some of these character traits I didn't like, and I examined this on myself, and I was like, what is going on here? And what I noticed was that I was on Facebook looking at people's photos that I would never necessarily see. They're not close friends in that respect where I would see their personal photos. So from that, I took a step back and I use social media just like I use my regular interactions of the day. I think about social media like, how would I interact with that person if I saw that person face to face? So let's use the photos as the example. Is if I don't know you enough that you're not going to invite me into your house and show me your photo album, I am not going on Facebook and checking out all your photos. I might do the scrolling and like a photo that's just on the timeline, but I'm not going to go in and look at all of that. And really, I'm feeling like I'm being intrusive, and that's none of my business. Why am I gawking on that? And it's not affecting me well. So I noticed that right off the bat. So the second to that is know who you are, because if you have your values set in place, like if you're going to value honesty and have integrity. So how are you going to display that on social media, on Facebook, and even private messaging? I was very young when I decided to live what I call in a glass house. What happens inside my house is very similar to what happens when I'm out and about in the community. And it takes a lot of stress off because it takes that mask away that we put on, these several masks when we see people. So I think it's imperative in this day and age, because of all the negativity that can be out there, that you have to protect yourself. You have to be careful of what your eyes see and what your ears hear. And a really good documentary that's out there right now is called The Social Dilemma, that talks about social media. I recommend that, because what what's happening with social media is there, and I enjoy social media, don't get me wrong, I use it, but I use it with my eyes wide open, that they are really, I am the commodity. They are selling my time to advertisers. That's the algorithms, so to speak, that are being used. So I would recommend that anybody watch The Social Dilemma, know what you're dealing with social media, and ask yourself those questions. Why are you on there? What do you want to gain from it? And what do you want to give to the people that you're interacting with as well? So we could have a whole hour discussion just on that if you.
Perfect. So thank you, Mayor, for taking the time and joining us today evening. It was very insightful. Learned so much. I mean, learned about the town of Hornpain that I may have never otherwise have come into contact with. So I think that's important, certainly for my students. That we live in a very, and I think especially in this pandemic where you're drawn inside, right? That you're not going and traveling, that you don't learn about places beyond, whether it's your city border or your town border or the province or the country now. So I think that's a very interesting perspective there, especially, and I loved hearing, obviously, that your success there in being an Indigenous female mayor there. That we should see more people like you across all of Ontario, or across all of Canada, across our country here. And I think perhaps maybe to close with, if you could provide any advice to my students, or advice to any women or Indigenous people of what they can do, not just necessarily in politics, but how we can break down these barriers, these institutional or systemic barriers that may be holding people back, right? The glass ceiling, so to speak, whether it's in engineering or whether it's in politics. What more can be done? And again, words of encouragement that I think go a long way in showing people successful role models like yourself that they can emulate.
Yeah, I guess in closing, I think what I would close with is be courageous. Do it afraid. And sometimes down deep in your gut, we know those things that are being said, or those things that are happening in a situation that aren't right. And it's in those times that, handled delicately and well, you can really impact somebody's thought. Um, I know I take the opportunity to try to let people know of what Indigenous people have encountered in our country and what the Indian Act is. Um, so I think that would be what I would leave you with, is to really be courageous, think about your own biases and where they are. We all have our own, and to recognize that, but be courageous. And sometimes you have to speak up, and being courageous means doing things even though you have fear to do them. So and it's hard sometimes to speak the truth, but for the betterment of our province, our communities, we need to. There's people hurting out there and suffering under racism and prejudice, and it needs to stop. It doesn't need to be that way.
And thank you so much for everything today. And I wish you all the best in leading the township of Hornpain through these challenging times and into the next part of your strategic plan there, and through the pandemic, and hoping you can accomplish all of your goals you've set out.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure, absolute pleasure to be here this evening.
And thank you to all the students for joining, and thank you, Rochelle, for organizing, and wish you all the best, Mayor Fort.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Mayor Cheryl and JP. Keep in touch.
Thank
you,
you.
Cheryl. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.